That's just the.
This is an introduction, but
No.
this is good though.
Okay.
Yeah, because actually this is like right on because I mean it happens to all of us, I'm sure. You know, I read the lectures and very often I read many of them. I read all of them, 258 more than once. But the thing is sometimes you read them, right? And then you like, oh my God, it's like you can really a lot of this material does not stay with you.
Right.
So I'm like, I get frustrated sometimes. Like, oh, I read all this material so important to me. And then when I read it was like so impacting and gosh, I don't remember exactly all the things that I wanted to remember. So this card or whatever, it was not a card you're saying, but it's just the introduction, kind of like answers me there. And I read this week actually something similar to that kind of made me feel better about this feeling. Because there's a story about this guy. I said it's a story about this student, a disciple, and a master. And the disciple asked the master, "Master, I've read so many books, and I don't remember any of them. So is it worth reading? I mean, And so the master says, he said, I'm thirsty. So then he goes, I go get me some water from the river because we're close to a river. And he said, but use that sieve that is there, that old sieve that is there. So the guy says, oh, telling me to bring water and, and the sieve is going to go through and nothing is going to stay, So he said, but he told me, so I'm going to go and try. So he goes and, tried and tried and tried. Of course, no water is going to stay there because it goes through, right? Colander or sieve, right?
Yeah.
Right.
So when they come back to the master, he says like, Master, nothing is there. I can't bring you water in this thing, nothing, So he said, the master says, but you see, this old rusty sieve is now cleansed from all the time that you went and tried to fish the water. So this is what reading does to the soul.
I like that.
By reading and reading, this is good for your soul, even if you don't remember what you have read.
Right.
So anyway, so this also is related to this. So it says, was the Pathwork spiritual laws, just an introduction of all the laws. And it says, for this reason, learning all about the spiritual laws is so very important to absorb them, understand them, and let them penetrate through the deeper layers of your consciousness so that you are able to apply this knowledge in the most difficult times and to walk through life with more ease. So it's the same, it's pretty much the same, right? It's like all these, as you read and read, this goes into your
Right.
consciousness.
Yeah.
And then you automatically, and even somewhere in the Bible, it says that some kind of like prayers, like, Lord, let me read your commandments so that they become ingrained in my heart and I can automatically act accordingly.
Yeah.
So this is the same thing. So even if we don't remember, that's the point.
Like
All these things that we read, they penetrate our souls. And and sometimes it happens to me, all of a sudden you get this concept, oh, so then you think it's coming from you, but it's this materials that is there, hidden in so you act automatically according to these principles.
Barbara, you want to read one?
Yes, I am the law of growth.
Wow.
Oh. Let's see.
Hopefully so are we all.
Trees. Yeah, it feels,
Oh, wow.
It's very
Beautiful.
Yeah, so
Artistic.
the purpose of life is to grow continuously. Growth implies the courage to enter the void, to allow the development and maturation of a new movement or the integration of a previously separated aspect. When in unity, there is consciousness and trust in the potentialities of the self and of life. In the dualistic plane, growth is permeated by fear and insecurities, which can generate the exact opposite, stagnation. Stagnation is an attempt to avoid painful experiences and greater responsibilities. You must accept and feel the pain of growing up, overcome childish bargains, enter your consciousness, and find out where your growth process has been interrupted. You're Your inner child awaits your love and care to develop, to feel safe, to let go of wanting his, her egotistical demands to be met by the outer reality. As your immature self is received, held, and develops, you transcend duality and become responsible for your growth. This allows you to be who you truly are.
These are cards, spiritual lost cards that I got from the Brazilian Pathworkers in Portugal.
Yeah.
So take a look.
It's very beautiful.
Yeah.
So we each took a card
And we're reading it.
and we're reading it.
Do this.
Oh, that's so nice.
Hi, whoever's on the TV, on the Zoom.
Teresa, Kevin, and Marion.
That was the card.
Hi.
You want to see it?
Show the card.
Oh, thank you so much.
Ah, nice.
That's beautiful.
They're all
I
beautiful.
love these colors.
What was the law?
I am the law of self-responsibility.
Yay.
Freedom and responsibility must walk hand in hand.
Mhm.
When you are aware that you create your own reality, no external factor can hurt you, even if suffering seems real at first. You are the conductor of your story. Someone else's fault challenges you to enter your soul's darkness. When you understand and find the cause and effect of your difficulties within yourself, you are free. Truth is the highest form of human dignity. As you become self-responsible, you love and respect yourself to the same extent, for you no longer cheat yourself, others, or life. Thus, you are responsible for yourself, others are responsible for themselves, and everyone is responsible for everyone. That is how you become strong enough to surrender to your inner being. Honesty reveals the greatness of your creator self, where you and we are one creator, bearers of God. Wow.
These are treasures.
They're fabulous.
Yeah.
Okay, who's next? Joel or Regina? Very nice.
Let me see.
The law of sacrifice is connected to the point of relinquishment through acceptance, letting go, and discipline. Through true sacrifice is giving up on the illusion of our little ego, caught in self-will, pride, and fears. It is necessary to discern sacrifice. It's necessary to discern sacrifice from self-detriment and deprivation. It is not right to use punishment, bargaining, and submission as false altruism to obtain rights, advantage, or special treatment.
That's false altruism. Right.
Right. These distortions prevent the experience of pleasure and restrict the vital flow. It is like giving up on life itself, which needs to flow and vibrate in pleasure for the body to remain healthy on this earthly plane. You have to find out who you are in order to make the real sacrifice of facing all destructive patterns, of facing and dealing with your shadow aspects. It is the true point of relinquishment. Your pleasure is interconnected to your self-respect, to the inner treasure that dwells in your depth. True spiritual development reveals as your sacred craft, which transcends any temporary loss. You must give up nothing in order to achieve everything. And the law of sacrifice.
Wow.
This is a strong word.
That's so like
This is a strong one.
right on. Yes, right on. But it's interesting that that the sacrifice, and I remember that reminds me another lecture where the guy says there is one word that you need in order to reach God's world, God's spirit world, God and his spirit world. And he says like this, literally, sacrifice, my friend.
Right.
Sacrifice.
I
You
remember
remember that lecture, right?
Yeah.
So, but it's good that this card explains that sacrifice, like he says at the end, it's about the sacrifice that you need to make. It's what you think in your illusion that is a sacrifice, but the only sacrifice you need to make is that of the ego, which is really prohibiting you from achieving all the pleasure that the universe has to offer you.
Yeah.
So the sacrifice is not like to be torturing oneself, like when you see in the Catholic Church, this martyrdom and all that stuff. Was misunderstood.
Right.
They misunderstand the concept.
Right.
But it's just the ego that needs to be sacrificed, and then
Right.
we fly to joy.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
it's that simple, but it's not so simple.
Okay, Joel.
I am the law of correspondence.
Response.
Here's the card.
Oh,
Yeah, they're just so beautiful.
She's trying. Correspondence card.
Go, Marion.
Let me hold it back for you.
Good.
Let me see.
Oh,
Sorry.
yeah.
I don't want to miss them.
I know,
I
they're.
know one's more beautiful than the next, I know.
I am the law of correspondence. Reality first exists in spirit, in different spheres, according to many levels and tones of vibration. Every earthly manifestation is a reflection of spiritual instances. Similarly, your outer world experiences reflect your inner world. Correspondence also refers to how you affect other people in the exact same frequency as your higher self, lower self, and mass vibrate. When you give in to your lower self, you create forms that correspond to your lower self type. As you allow your higher self to manifest, you create correspondingly beautiful, harmonious forms. When you express your full life potential on Earth, which corresponds to your developmental stage, you become free from all forms of inner disharmony. What arises from your real self affects others' real self and the whole universe.
Yes. It's nice.
Okay, thank you very much for reading the cards.
Very nice, really nice.
All right, so is everybody, I'm sorry, go ahead, Teresa.
Well, I always have this, this thought with all the political activism and stuff that's going on. Like we always trying to change the outside.
Yes.
That sort of nails it, that if you are true to yourself, it affects other people. And that's how change and
Exactly.
Right.
that's how it happens.
Right.
So you feel like you're working on yourself and it feels like sometimes I feel like I'm isolated working on myself, but it has an effect.
Yeah.
And that kind of
Yeah.
describe that when you work on yourself and your true self comes through,
Yes.
it affects everybody's
Everything around
true self.
Yeah.
They all want
Now, I would love to make these cards available to more people.
Of course.
All right, everyone, can you see me okay, you guys out there in cyberspace?
Looking good, Alan.
Thank you. Okay, all right. Lecture 68. Suppression of positive and creative tendencies, thought processes. Okay. Now,
Here, I have it memorized. If you want mine.
You have it memorized.
he has it memorized.
Pretty much, yeah.
Okay. This lecture, it's interesting because if you look at the first page, the guide says that there were two phases of the pathwork that happened first. This is the third phase. He says that in the first phase of the pathwork, I discussed first certain general facts about the universe, the creation, and the part played in it by the human entity. So if you'll remember, the early lectures, there's one about God, salvation. There's one about higher self, lower self, and mask. Well, that's the cosmology of the pathwork.
Creation.
Reincarnation, the creation, how things got underway. That, I think, is what the guy talks about, the first general facts about the universe. the creation and the part played in it by the human entity. In other words, it gives the picture of why we're here, which therapy does not do, ladies and gentlemen, right? I mean, therapy is about functioning. I can't have a good relationship, or I'm confused about X, or I keep getting sick. I mean, therapy is about making you able to function in the world, but it doesn't give you answers about where things came from and why we're here on Earth. So the guide says that that was the first phase of the path work, which I think took about 3 years to talk about our place in the universe and the creation of the universe and how it all began. The second phase, he says, dealt with the obstructions in the human soul due to conscious or unconscious misconceptions, wrong conclusions, deviations, the images which cause conflict and unhappiness. We focused on the healing of the sick part of the human soul. Now, that's also the purview of therapy, right? The healing of the sick part of the human soul. But in the path work, we also had this cosmic connection with an understanding of the meaning of things. So the second phase was understanding how we are our own worst enemy, how we have parts of ourselves that drag us down. We have blind spots. And as Joel was reading in the Law of Correspondence, how our three aspects, higher self, lower self, and mask, how they interact and rub up against those aspects in other people, so that our misconceptions and blindness hooks up with another person's misconception and blindness. That's partly how evil is created. But these lectures are about how we can understand these stumbling blocks that we have to growth, right? And how we can understand what the images are, the misconceptions, and the things that hurt us and keep us miserable and conflicted. All right. Now, ladies and gentlemen, there's a third phase, he says, which this lecture begins. The human being suppresses not only negative aspects, but positive and creative tendencies in the soul as well. Our aim is not only to heal the sick part of the soul, but also to encourage the growth and unfoldment of that which in you is striving for fulfillment, which ought to be expressed, but is not allowed to be. So I really think that the Pathwork Guide touches a nerve here, because all of us, I think, feel that we don't really do justice to our positivity enough. We often, except for the artists, of course, like you, Barbara, we don't do justice to our creativity. We don't bring out what's good in us enough, right? We spend too much time with the lower self or the mask self. So the guide says, it is evident that destructive tendencies based on wrong conclusions in the unconscious prohibit the unfolding of constructive and creative tendencies in you. Therefore, we shall certainly go on treating the deviations in you as we have gone so far. The introduction of a new approach does not mean the past approach will be discarded. On the contrary, it will often be necessary to continue searching and finding these destructive images in all their aspects and variations. I do not think any of you believe that this part of the work is over. We will, however, add a new approach in searching for the suppression of positive and creative tendencies as they clamor for the expression of your individuality in a manner that does not necessarily correspond to the ideas of your environment. So that's something the guide emphasizes the next couple of pages, because somehow he's saying that our environment, meaning not only the world, where everybody has to complain all the time, but our friends and our relationships, in a sense, conspire against the unfolding of our creativity. There's a kind of inertia that basically says, don't let what's beautiful and creative in you out. Either you're going to get hurt if you do that, or no one's gonna listen to you or take you seriously. There's a kind of bias against this unfoldment of creativity, it seems. I mean, everyone is supposed to give in their jobs, right? You're supposed to be creative in your job, but often on the job, you can't really express what you believe is the best in you. So the tendency to want to create, the guy talks about this in a number of places, quote, in a manner that does not necessarily correspond to the ideas of your environment.
That's key right there.
That's key, right? Unlike here on page 2, he goes, one of the most common diseases, sorry about that, of humanity is a tendency to generalize and standardize, which has more far effects than you realize. It also affects your own psyche by suppressing your personal unfoldment, creativity, and expression. This may manifest in leading a particular way of life not of your choice, because your environment seems to disapprove of your way. Further down, by now you may no longer be aware of what it is that you do not dare or want to do. In other words, you're disconnected from moving out your creativity in some ways. Further on, he says again, if you deny yourself the expression of your spiritual nature, you damage yourself just as much as when you suppress any other manifestation of the life force. And then further on, and also, you may already surmise that the connection between the suppression. Quiet, Addison. You may also surmise that the connection between the suppression of the negative and the positive aspects is often quite strong. Your dependency on public opinion and approval applies, therefore, not only to your faults, your selfishness, and your destructiveness, which causes you to form images in your unconscious mind, but it also causes you to forfeit the best part of your nature. And the latter makes you suffer just as much as the former. So I hope that's clear enough that the guide is saying that something about our environment suppresses our ability to move out our creativity, our love, our positivity, our higher self.
Something about our
Our
environment.
environment.
So
I mean,
it
just
is-
think of
it's-
that as-
Well, what do you think,
It's on
Teresa?
response to our environment.
Right, and I think sometimes it's like cultural norms.
Right.
You know, like my little grandson, he's very creative and he does some weird shit. You know, like he, paints his nails like the girl, and he doesn't care, which is great. But I could see where over time the world would say,
You shouldn't do that, you're a boy or.
yeah, and he would maybe then suppress, and it's like that little chipping away at your
Yeah.
creative part,
My
No.
my wife was showing something.
Talk louder if you can't
I
go.
was showing something to my art teacher. And it might have been something my grandson did. Anyway, he said all children are artists. All children are artists.
Mhm.
It's that they learn or they're the environment. They get messages from the environment that's not
Not to do that, yeah.
right. They start to suppress it.
But I have to, just say, I'm very proud of my daughter who doesn't buy into that. Like she just lets him be who he is and she really supports whatever he's doing that's creative. So it's kind of
Well,
fun
I
to
mean, I think
watch.
that's pretty.
But I have like I can feel it in myself. That's not, like different reactions to things. So that's like my work, right?
Yeah, so that's the first part of the lecture about the suppression of the creative, and the positive that and it's easy for us to fall into. The guide often says that there's a need to give, which is just as profound as the need to receive. And if you don't give, you hamstring yourself. You cripple yourself if you don't give.
While giving is receiving.
Giving is receiving. Anyway, so then the second section, I would say, of the lecture, after the guide talks about what he calls the influence of the environment. Then he says, when I speak, this is about organized religion. When I speak of the urge for the expression of your spiritual nature, organized religion is seldom the answer, especially not in your time.
And this is how many years ago, right?
This is 1960.
Yeah, 40, 65 years ago.
Yeah.
So he says,
Downhill a little bit more since then.
Yeah.
it's gotten
Yeah.
worse. So he says, yeah, organized religion, right, this is the battle that's playing out. Organized religion, he says, was affected by the human tendency to generalize and standardize, to make rules and dogmas supposed to be valid for all beings. Although general rules do hold true for certain crass modes of conduct relating to crime and the upholding of social laws for the good of the community, one's personal spirituality is an eminently private affair.
That's right.
So he's saying that your own spirituality is something that you personally discover, and it can't be fit into a dogma or a standard. Now, this comment about that certain crass moods of conduct relating to crime. Now, I venture to say that path workers do not commit crimes. I mean,
Not supposed
the guy kind of
He's
not supposed to anyway.
At least level.
Blue collar. But I'm just saying that path work, people that are on a spiritual path believe in a certain kind of morality, which I was thinking, I mean, I don't think that path workers would break most of the commandments, you know, the famous 10 Commandments.
Yeah.
But this whole idea that, and the guide says this in many lectures. Hey, Chad.
Hey guys, how are you?
That you know, that we do not commit crimes.
Yeah, they say that. I remember that.
I mean, I think that that's probably a fair statement, you know. But
You know, like right now, where in this country where we have you know, people rounding up immigrants and they're playing loose with laws, and we have politicians who are, you know, trying to stand up. I don't know, I just heard about Brad Lander being arrested or whatever, and in all in other words, that which the spiritual laws, we're not going to break spiritual laws, but sometimes I think maybe path workers might break a civil law that maybe
sure.
goes against a spiritual law. Or
Oh, sure. No, I think
something
that
like
we are in
that.
agreement about that. I
Yeah.
think that
that's just
you know, the quote unquote the higher law versus
Yeah.
you know, Les Mis, you know, you might steal some bread to feed your family because, you know, it's not a terrible crime to do that. But I think that it's a fair statement that path workers would not commit an act of violence against someone else. People would not do that. And it's so interesting how so much of the attention is always focused on street crime in our society. All the news is about street crime. It's all about, meanwhile, the bigger crimes are happening on another stage. As Pretty Boy Floyd said, through this world you wander, you'll meet lots of funny men. Some will rob you with a 6-gun and some with a fountain pen. But you know, I'm just thinking that in a world where people were on a spiritual path, there wouldn't be any street crime. People wouldn't get knifed or hit over the head. I think that's true. Anyway,
I do remember that one Q&A where the guide, somebody asked something about, you know, breaking a law or something, and the guide said, I always remember, my dear child, you're not committing murder because it's a law, but because you know it's wrong, you know, like, you know, you always, people are doing this spiritual work on the path are connected to a deeper place that tells you right from wrong, you know, versus some
All right. So anyway, in this section, the guy talks about organized religion is seldom the answer because it basically creates rules and standards that don't apply to one's personal, private, spiritual path. One's personal spirituality is an eminently private affair. The maximum growth of one human being may be based on entirely different spiritual factors and ways of life than the maximum and expression than the maximum growth of another person. Organized religion does not take this into account, nor do the various modern substitutes for religion. The only way a human being can learn to express this important side of his or her nature is by such work as we are doing, in the course of which you recognize what causes you to suppress your individuality with all its manifestations. So, it's interesting, the guide says, the expression of your own divine nature cannot be fitted into standard rules, regulations, and dogmas, no matter how ethical they may be.
Yeah.
They can only show right outer conduct and never right inner conduct. So obviously where Christ in the Bible says something about people that wash the outside of the cup and leave the inside dirty, the hypocrisy, that outer conduct can be measured, but never inner conduct. Who you are and where you're coming from is your own personal affair. And ethics only can apply to outer conduct, what actually happens on the material level. In former times, the human being's spiritual nature was often hindered by the general rules of a creed. In modern times, this spiritual nature is hindered by new dogmas, such as the materialistic philosophy of life. Well, that's clear enough. I mean, I think that materialism is in the in the ascendant. Obviously, our president is quite a materialist, and what he's into is gold. What he's into is parades, money, yachts. The people that have money get a lot of deference, a lot of credit. Materialism, and I think that excuses a lot of conduct. So, third section, the guide talks now about understanding our life plan. When you are born into life, you carry within yourself your individual life plan. In order to fulfill it, your psyche clamors demandingly that you proceed in a certain direction. When you deny the inner call, be it for the reason of deviations, images, wrong conclusions, or because you believe the right thing to do is what is proclaimed by your environment, the consequences are that the maximum growth of your personality is gravely thwarted.
Yeah.
So, there's a new approach to unfoldment, though, that the guide is going to roll out in this lecture, which is the thought process, understanding the thought processes. Just as people often ignore the difference between love and sentimental weakness, love and masochistic dependency, and thus distance themselves from real love, so do they ignore the difference between true individual spirituality and the escape into a pseudo-religion out of weak motivations. So later on, the guide says, you may experience a certain sadness when discovering that you did not heed the inner voice that would have brought you the fulfillment you did not consider right. But it is also true that despite your wanting the right goal and having pure motives, your negative tendencies played a role in your not listening to the voice of the innermost self. So now the guide is talking about this third phase of the pathwork, where the second phase was to search for the negative tendencies and the images and the obstructions. The third phase is to search for suppressed positive tendencies, which you now know deserve the right of expression. you will find that what you vaguely felt was wrong and had to be concealed is part of the best in you, or it will bring you to your best, your individual fulfillment in the highest spiritual and emotional sense. So he's saying that we deliberately restricted our positive unfoldment, search for suppressed positive tendencies. Now he segues into this idea about monitoring and understanding our thought processes. For a long time, we were preoccupied with the emotional side of your nature. Again, I say the introduction of a new approach does not mean lessenings of one's efforts in the old direction. However, we shall now begin also to pay attention to the thought process as an additional help yielding other benefits for the unfoldment of the personality. All right, so the thought process, what does the guide mean by that? If you are governed by your emotions, conscious or unconscious, you lose control over yourself and over your life. Right?
Obvious.
We agree. The same applies to your thought process. If you become master over your thoughts, you become master over your mind. And so you have mastery of your life. By mastery, I certainly do not mean a discipline that suppresses anything, negative or positive, in you. This concept is unfortunately often misunderstood and mistakenly practiced. We will have to be careful not to fall into the same error. Thought control can be mastered without rigidity and suppression. On the contrary, properly done, it will bring into awareness what needs to come to the surface. Many current movements teach thought control by suppression. As I have often said, this is not necessary and is actually very damaging. Your emotions must be allowed to come to the fore so you can observe and evaluate them. All right, so now the guide gives an exercise about how to do that. Recognize your uncontrolled thoughts, their power over you, their significance, as well as their lack of significance. Okay, so I'm going to outline this theory or the concept about how to understand one's thoughts. We can distinguish between foreground thoughts and background thoughts. Both have many subdivisions and many layers. By proper observation and concentration, you will gradually learn to become aware of these various layers. Foreground thought is voluntary, background thought is involuntary. What I now tell you, you will experience as being true if you learn proper self-observation. Foreground, that is, voluntary thought, is always clear-cut and concise. As long as it remains in the foreground, it does not slide unnoticed into background thoughts. If you want to think something, whether constructive or unconstructive, as long as you follow it through, it is foreground thought. When you become calm and observe your thought process, you will soon begin to notice the importance of background thoughts. Background thought comes unbidden. It is disorganized and mainly unconstructive. All right, so what's the background thoughts? What are they? 1, symptoms of disturbed emotions and inner conflicts that never express the conflict itself. They might bring the nucleus of the conflict to the fore if the symptoms are analyzed and properly understood. In order to do that, the vague, unvolitional background thoughts have to be made into foreground thoughts. Number 2, the second kind of background thought. You re-experience events, conversations, or impressions in snatches and fragments. If these do not belong in the first category, they're completely without significance. Your mind is triggered, has registered certain impressions, and it repeats them automatically like the rolling of wheels. As long as these thoughts remain in the background and you harbor them without full awareness, you cannot distinguish between what is important in them and what is utter waste. Repetition of impressions may not only be important because it is indicative of a symptom of conflict, it may also be important because a constructive impression may add something to your life, to your person, to your inner self. Only when these impressions and thoughts are consciously observed can you derive such a benefit. In other words, you must make foreground thoughts out of background thoughts. Third type, wishful thinking. You may re-experience a conversation, going over how it might have been or how it should have been, what you should have said instead of what you did say. Or you build a daydream of what you wish to happen in the future, which is vague, unrealistic, elusive, and unconnected to your real desires, and doesn't take account of the obstacles within your soul. Such thoughts are entirely wasteful if they're not made into foreground thoughts and evaluated. So the guide is saying that what we should do is this: transfer background thought material into conscious foreground thought. Learn to evaluate the content of the vague background thoughts, and if you find that they are insignificant, learn to discard them. This process will bring forth additional material about your unconscious conflicts and teach you to control your mind in a healthy and constructive way. This practice will release a great deal of strength in you, which was formerly used up in background thoughts. You have no idea how much mental and emotional and eventually physical strength they consume. So, he's talking about concentration exercises. He also talks about this in the following couple of lectures. So what do you guys think about this concept of the wasting of energy in background thoughts and maybe we should do the exercise. If you like, we can do an exercise based on this the guy talks about. Sit down twice a day for 5 minutes, no more, anytime you wish. Choose a time or place where and when you will know you'll not be undisturbed. Sit down comfortably, do not lie down. This is basically an exercise about listening to your breathing. Become very calm, relax completely without trying to exert any force, strain, or pressure. Relax completely without trying to exert any force, strain, or pressure. Begin to follow the abdominal movements of your breath. When you breathe very quietly, up and down, up and down. Or if you prefer, imagine a point between your eyes, whichever is easier. Be prepared for your mind soon to be disturbed by unvolitional background thoughts. Expect them, observe them quietly. If they're not of pressing importance for you now, indicating a disturbance in your psyche, discard them quietly without getting impatient with yourself. Resume the task of following the abdominal movements of your breath or of concentrating on the imaginary point between your eyes, all the time aware of what the background thoughts really are when they do come. It suffices to observe them as they appear in order to become conscious of the mechanism of thought process. You will then become aware that you are the victim of these thoughts. This awareness will bring you nearer to the goal. At the beginning, it will seem impossible to think of nothing but your breath movements. At the beginning, it will seem uninvited thought fragments will constantly rush in. Most of the time, they will be so powerful as to make you unaware that you do indulge in them. You will notice them only after a while. When you do, try to recollect what your thoughts made you think of. Say to yourself, I was thinking of this or that, whatever it may have been. This in itself is a means to become more aware of yourself. You may then either go on with your concentration and defer to analyze the thought materials until after, or you may do so right away if you feel the urge and resume the concentration exercise another time. So let's do that for 5 minutes. So what did people feel? Did they feel the differences between the foreground and background thoughts? Were people able to maintain the focus?
It's hard for me, at least. It's hard to like the mind just wants to wander. Then I bring it back to just the breath, but then it wanders again. I don't know if other people are experiencing a similar thing. So that's why I think meditation is quite hard, because to just keep it focused on the breath and not allow the thoughts to start running, it's very challenging.
So Teresa was saying, actually, this is actually one of the technique that we have, the other group of meditation that I belong to. But we have actually kind of like a mantra. It's a sound that you make. So that helps, I think, in you maintaining the focus. We have like a sound that we say mentally when the breath goes out and when it comes in. I cannot divulge that because it's supposed to be illegal to do that, to say the mantra. But you can, any mantra you can use. I remember the beginning when I first started meditating, I found the mantra, the book of mantra, and I found this mantra that goes, so, and, so, and. It has a meaning in Hindi, I think. But when your breath goes out, you say, but mentally you say this,
Yeah.
and so that helps, I think, to keep the mind focused. But definitely, it's not easy, as you're saying.
Yeah.
It's very tempting because then everything starts to come out. But as you practice, you become more aware of these thoughts coming in, and you can easily release them. That's what happens to me now at this point, because after so many years of practicing, you observe the thoughts like, okay, adios, adios, and then you just keep focusing on the, on the breath and on the sound of the, that you emit mentally. Yeah.
Okay, so to continue with the lecture, he says, even minor success in this exercise will bring marked improvements in many ways. In addition to the benefits I outlined before, in addition to the power to discriminate between your foreground and background thoughts, you will derive further benefits, such as a general power of discrimination, increased inner and outer vitality, better memory, clearer and stronger thoughts, and last but not least, the increased ability to make your inner will function. Your inner will is necessary to follow through and learn what we are discussing here. In turn, your inner will is bound to function better to the extent you learn concentration. So, on page 8, awareness and control of background thoughts, the understanding of the whole thinking procedure with its various levels is much more important than you now realize. It is a mistake to separate this approach from the conflicts of your psyche. They're intimately connected, which becomes apparent when both approaches are followed through properly. In other words, the unfoldment of creativity and the confronting of negativity. Now he gives a further guidance about this exercise. When you progress a little in this exercise and succeed in being a watcher, visualize a compass needle. The compass needle represents your thought movements. Watch the needle sway back and forth. The more background thoughts come, dispersing your attention in all directions because you do not control them, the more the needle will sway from one direction to the other. The more you succeed in becoming calm inwardly and focusing your thoughts on what you desire, the more will the needle remain still, poised, restful, and controlled, not controlled by strenuous discipline or outer willpower, but by your relaxed summoning of your calm inner will. The more detachedly you observe the involuntary thought process, the more you will succeed in staying above it. All right. So now again, he talks about the suppression of the positive. He says, try to think about your past desires from the point of view I introduced tonight. whether or not it was something important or an apparently insignificant detail about your way of life, did you desist at the time from following through with a positive creative impulse because, as you are now seriously convinced, it was wrong for you? If it was not, did you desist out of fear or out of dependency on others' approval? Or was the wish based on unhealthy motives in the first place? Was there underneath the unhealthy motives a very healthy one you could not see because of your vague awareness and your guilt about the existence of the unhealthy motives? Would you have had the courage to follow through with your desire if the unhealthy motives had been absent? Would you then have stood your ground and been true to your personality? Can you discover the original desire disappears or weakens with the absence of the unhealthy motives? You could try to formulate and answer these and similar questions. So do we understand what he's talking about here? About how one betrays the self by not following through on positive desires? We have unhealthy and healthy motives. Sometimes we don't want to act on the healthy motives, but on the unhealthy motives. I think that's what he's saying.
They're intertwined.
And they're intertwined.
They can be intertwined in the same. And
Yeah.
that's what makes it hard to
Yeah.
tease out.
And I think that he's talking about that this whole process of understanding and letting these thoughts come up gives you a clue as to what your motivations are.
Yeah.
It's so he says, you will have to establish whether you desired this goal. Well, he's answering a question here, because of unhealthy motives, or whether the unhealthy motives merely covered the form of self-expression best fitted for your individual personality. A discovery of suppression of healthy outlets may show you a new road, which might be extremely satisfactory and fulfilling. And then a very interesting quote here. In many instances, what one wants is not what one really wants, but what one thinks one wants. When this is the case, it is always due to unhealthy tendencies and reactions. Well, that's
Especially if you're the will type.
especially if you're the will
Like
type.
trying to
That's right.
sort out. Do I just want my
Do I really
way,
want this, or?
or-
And then he says, when you face your lower nature, your deviations, and the phantom world of your illusions, so that you can change it all into true concepts, it feels certainly more painful than facing something you have suppressed, because you thought erroneously that you must be guilty and ashamed of it. That you did suppress that you did suppress it, so is of course due to negative motivations. However, you will experience a great joy and liberation now in releasing something vitally creative in you, leading you to the fulfillment of your individual personality. So that's a very big theme in this lecture, the ways in which we suppress the best in us for various reasons. So what do you think?
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay. I can't comment on every aspect of this lecture. It would be a whole nother lecture. So I'll just share just a bit of what I experienced, and also to be connected with everybody there. And I'm so grateful for, in the Pathwork, the image work. And of course, the guide refers to that in this lecture. And that has been crucial to me in observing what's going on, because I learned so much from my images, and that they just don't all go away. They may get less controlling because I recognize them sooner. And one of mine is that when I am at a stage where something expansion is coming, or maybe someone's invited me to speak somewhere, or there's something else that is expansive for me, what I've learned now is to expect that me that is based on fear, I call her my human self, to resist, because the guide speaks about the positive, the positive as well as the negative, reacting to that and suppressing. So for me, it's a lot about suppressing the positive, because to me, any kind of expansion means being seen. And I learned as a child to try to stay invisible. I was very different from everyone else in my family. These are images. And so to stand out and be seen means uh, pain and fear and terror. So that still persists. And I do teach others that some of those early childhood experiences, that they don't all just go away. They may lessen and lighten up, but they'll remain as a gateway for transformation. So mine, when we were having our 5 minutes, I too have a mantra, and I've learned to use it, and just, I know so much about myself, just crowd out those thoughts, put them over in the corner. They're not all going to go away. But when they did, it's like I've learned that part of me that is based on fear, to tell her, to listen to her. What is the fear? What are you afraid of? What, and hold her hand. So I use a lot of psychodrama. Hold her hand, let her speak. And she says, that aspect of me says, I'm not going with you doing anything expansive, anything anybody wants you to do to be visible, give a talk, whatever, forget about it. I'm not going there. I've never been there, and you can't make me. And so then I call her belligerent Marion, and she's always there with me, but I can tell her, oh, I'm always with you. I'll never leave you home alone. Come with, we'll do something just a little bit that you can take a step out to do something. And then she'll give me an idea like, well, how about that new coffee shop that has those lattes, those coconut milk lattes? I've wanted one of those. And then I say, okay, we can do that. So it's expansive for that belligerent Marion. For me, it's empathy toward her. And then a light bulb goes off, because one of my images is that I have to work hard and be working all the time. And she was kind of my prompter to take a break, go have a latte. So it means working with all those aspects, not dumping any of them away, but letting each one speak in a way where my higher self is in charge all the time. That aspect of me is not in charge, but I am empathic toward her, which is different than giving her the power. I am empathic. So today, doing this 5 minutes, I could see where, okay, it's still going on, still going on. Hi, everybody. Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks, Marion. Kevin, do you have thoughts about, do you practice this kind of meditation?
So I've had a bit of a history with this type of meditation. It started probably 2008 when I was doing lucid dreaming and wake-induced lucid dreaming, where I would spend, I would say probably middle of the evening or the nighttime, depending upon sleep cycles, going through about, I don't know, 20 minutes, 10, 15 minutes. It depends on how you hit it with your REM cycles. But if you do this meditation at the right time, what typically can happen is you can walk your way consciously into a dream state. And it's as you start doing that, you become very intimate, let's say, with all aspects of your consciousness rather quickly, because you do see them arise rather impulsively, let's say, initially. And over the course, I would say I practiced lucid dreaming for about, I would say 4 years or so, maybe 5 years, very, very heavily. And this was even before, I guess, I got into Zen Buddhism and some of the thoughts around eliminating your conditioning. So really, it was kind of a natural progress to read this here in the lecture and to see it rekindled in the form of the guide instructing us to do similarly. Yeah, so it's a comfortable state, let's say, for me, from what my experience is. And it's kind of like home base, to be honest with you, because when I'm in the waking world and I get disturbed or upset about a given situation where my little Marion or my little Kevin comes out and needs to run away from a given scenario when he's uncomfortable either at work or presenting something in front of a large crowd. Yeah, I can lose that center for sure. I could lose that place, but it's also somewhat now more reliable to talk to that aspect of me as it arises instead of just identifying with whatever arises immediately. Um, so I guess over the course of, yeah, it depends, weeks, months, it depends on what particularly I want to work on in myself at any given time. But yeah, the process, one of the things I guess I wanted to mention about this lecture in general when I read it was that it it reflected and mirrored the three voice meditation that that the guide helped me learn about and brought up to practice. The reason it really resonated with the three voices is primarily because the work with the lower self being one of those voices is sort of like this second phase that the guide was talking about, working on the emotional rising state of, these specific aspects of you. But how I see, or how I've experienced, I should say, across the last, I don't know, maybe 5 years now, 6 years, something like that, since the path work has entered my life, is that now I can relate as well to the higher self portion, which is not so much focusing on fixing anything, even though it is certainly um, essential in having that voice in order to appropriately work with the lower self and fix things. Like you were saying earlier, it's intertwined. But the higher self voice really on its own, without it necessarily being focused on fixing anything, is a voice about expression for me. And it's a voice about making my heart sing. It's a voice of joy. It's a voice of creativity. It's a voice of dancing, things like this. And for me personally, it comes through, or it came through art as a child, music, and then now more writing, different aspects like that. So, it's not about fighting or fixing a thing, to be honest with you. It's more about just, letting yourself express yourself comfortably and naturally.
Thank you. So you're talking about Kevin and Marion about creating an observer space where the observer exists and can let these aspects come out. Does everyone know about the three voices, the meditation three voices? Chat. It's pretty straightforward. The guide says that we have three aspects: the higher self, lower self, and the mask. The mask is what we put on for the world to protect ourselves from vulnerability.
Yeah, I understand.
Idealized self-image. In other words, that's the persona we put on to get along. The
I
lower
understand the higher self and the lower.
Correct. Okay. The lower self is the destructive, evil, nasty.
The lower
Child,
I think
childlike.
in other spiritual circles they call it the shadow.
Yeah. They call it the
It's
shadow
same
too.
thing.
Correct.
There's
Yes.
one thing I wanted to say about was it Marianne that spoke first?
Marion.
Marion, excuse me. I think what she was touching on, because I think if I understand this lecture correctly, it's the concept of suppressing the lower self and suppressing the higher self in different circumstances, where a lot of the time we suppress the higher self, and this is touching on which Marion was saying, for the fear of being seen, and the fear of being heard. But what's underneath that, I think, is actually, because it's interesting. I thought a lot about my greatest fears, and I figured out that for me personally, my greatest fear is actually not being seen, not being heard, and not being loved. Um, and but I think the deeper fear underneath not being seen, or of being seen and being heard, because that's the suppression of the higher self, is a fear of being judged. That's, I think, what the fear is beneath the fear of being seen and the fear of being heard. But it's interesting because a lot of people that I've spoken to, I think a lot of us have the same fear and desire, that either the fear of not being seen and heard, or the fear of being seen and heard too much, because then you feel like you're going to be judged. So I think a lot of the time, when we engage in the suppression of the higher self in the way that this lecture is describing, it's because it's a fear of being judged. And then the suppression of the lower self or the shadow is that we don't want to accept the negative aspects of ourselves, also probably for fear of being judged, and maybe even in that sense, more of like judging ourselves. Because once we start to accept the shadow aspects, then we start to like think about ourselves in a different way, right? Because we've always been wearing the mask and telling ourselves that we're one way, and we're suppressing those lower desires and those lower thoughts, whatever they might be. But I think what part of what this lecture is teaching and what the pathwork teaches in general is that we have to accept both the lower and the higher aspects so that we can become fully ourselves and truly accept ourselves for the lower and the higher aspects without fear of being judged by ourselves or by others.
But right, I think that's a good summary.
Yeah.
The thing is that the reason we can't do it alone is because when we experience the fear of being judged, it's hard to get through that. But if other people are doing it with us and we don't judge them for their bullshit and their anger and their nastiness, then we suddenly realize, hey, guess what? I don't have to worry about being judged because I have the same qualities and I'm not judging this person.
Yeah.
I'm instead, the person's giving me a great gift by sharing this negativity that otherwise he would keep covered up. And the reason it's a big gift is because if he didn't share it, he'd act it out and I'd get hurt by it. But because he's sharing it, he's not acting it out. He's exposing it. So he's neutralizing it. Becoming vulnerable, yeah.
I see that's
Step
something
one.
underneath also the fear. I think under there's something else, I think, under the fear of being judged. I'll say, I think under the fear of being judged is the fear of being rejected, not
Yeah.
accepted, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't care if you judge me, but if you're okay with that, you being the bad guy that I am, but you still love me and accept me, I think I'll be okay with that. But when you are judged and not accepted and rejected, in my case, I know that's what I fear. That non-acceptance, that being ridiculed or isolated or not taken into consideration or whatever. I mean, I overcame that now, hopefully. But in the beginning, especially when I started this work, that was a big, and of course the fear of being seen, of being exposed. I mean, I still don't like to be exposed, to be honest. I rather stay in the backstage. But I realized that that's just my personality, I think. Yeah.
I can add something that I think that is the fear of rejection is it triggers when we were young and we felt for whatever stupid reason our mother said, oh, you did this wrong, we were felt not accepted.
Yeah.
Is underneath that is the pain that we felt and we suppressed it when we were young because we felt mom or dad doesn't love us. That is a big thing. It's a bigger suppression. It's a hurt. So I think that is at least in me is the feeling of being rejected is that I'm discovering now is to go back to the pain that caused me, and it was so painful because there is nothing more life-threatening for a little child when it feels like the mother is rejecting because the mother is the most important thing that the child. I'm talking about when you are real young. It's the most important in that because you are not able to
depend on them.
No, but also you are not able to understand all the feeling that you have because you are a little child. So it feels like a boom, rejection. It feels like pain. It feels like not being loved. It feels like it's life-threatening. And that we suppress it so much because it's so scared that when we go on life, what you understand?
It's that, yes, suppressed area. So it stays there until you work with it.
Yeah, it's the hurt.
Bring it to the surface and work with it.
We don't want to feel. because we're terrorized because
I have had a frequent story told about my granddaughter. She's 3 years old and she's very solid. The other day she was in our den and she was watching Paw Patrol, and then she said, who Grandpa, do you like Paw Patrol? And Joel said, oh, I like the grizzly bear. This is another show that her brother watched. She immediately found her stuffed animal was a teddy bear and got up from the couch and went over to Joel and said, I have a bear. And I thought, wow. I mean, this is a very solid, well-adjusted child. I mean, I'm sure she won't end up that way because life will take her down eventually. But right now, that's who she is. And just the fact that he preferred the Grizzly show over her Paw Patrol, she felt the immediate need to show him that she had a teddy bear. And I just watched this and I thought that is because she's the opposite of insecure. Do you know what? If she's just one of these kids that
I need you to love him.
but it was shocking. But I want to say one other thing. Many years ago, I went to see Silvio Rinpoche in the church over here. Were you there that night? It was maybe 15, 20 years ago. Silvio Rinpoche, he's a Tibetan master. He wrote the Tibetan Book of Living and Dying. He's since passed. Have you heard of him?
No.
Silvio Rinpoche.
Sure.
Well, okay. Anyway, he was here in New York. And I sat there for 2 hours. I couldn't tell you, talking about piggyback. Not one thing can I remember except one sentence from the 2 hours. And I listen. You know, I listen.
Yeah.
That's one of the things that I can do well is listen. You have to go to law school. You have to listen, you know, in school in general. But anyway, I couldn't tell you one thing that he said except one sentence. And he said, the only thing you have to fear is an untrained mind.
Okay.
And that has stuck with me for over 20 years. And I say, and now this is just this lecture brings it because if you let your thoughts get the better of you, you know, get run wild, you can get your knickers so twisted up so fast that you can't even, you know, you just have you heard the joke, the joke about the man with the jack? Well, this man was driving on an old country road and it was Christmas Eve and his car breaks down and he needs a jack to change his tire. And he realizes that he had passed a gas station about a mile back. So he gets out, it's snowing like the clappers, it's cold, it's Christmas Eve, he's out in the middle of nowhere. And as he's going back to the gas station to ask to borrow the jack so he can change his tire, he's convincing himself that the man in the gas station won't lend it to him. And he's walking along and he's never going to give it. He's never going to let it. I don't even know why I'm bothering to ask. So he finally gets to the gas station, rings in. This is back in the old days where the person lived above the gas station, rings the doorbell. The old man comes in and he goes, you know, Merry Christmas. How can I help you? He goes, take the goddamn jack and shove it up your ass.
Yeah.
Because this is what we anyway, that's all I have to say other than to parrot what Chad also said, which is I find meditation extremely hard. You have to really put in practice. You know, it's like anything. You gotta practice and train your mind. And
Yeah.
the only thing you have to fear is an untrained mind. But I'm not able to do.
No, it's really
these.
different. And
Mantras, breathing exercises. It doesn't matter. My mind is.
Can I just add
Yeah.
one other, you know, I agree with everything, the fear of rejection, the fear of pain, all that stuff. But, you know, I also have this fear of acceptance. You know, like,
Interesting.
you know, if you're like, it's almost like if you're accepted, you kind of disappear or something.
Interesting. That's interesting. You
How do you disappear?
because you blend in. You blend in.
You become sort of like
One of the cracks.
it's like your ego
wants to be different
wants to be
and
different.
stay separated and say separation.
Yeah, so the fear of acceptance.
That's interesting.
So that you don't want to be accepted?
no, you guys,
Start
How many kids were there? 6, 7?
9.
That's interesting.
9
You
kids.
had to
So-
you have to be
your
respectful. You have to stand out.
place.
Wow.
Yeah, because it was always the gang. You know. So.
Okay, so part of it, I gather what it is for you was you were afraid that by being accepted by everybody else, you were going to become like them in ways that you didn't like.
Well, that's
You were
true, too.
conforming to things. You would be conforming to ways of doing things and beliefs that you were
But I
not.
think there's more to it too. Like, I think there is. I mean, I was trying to tease out the thought. I was, bringing the background thought to the foreground. What is that really about? And the fear of acceptance, like
Is that you're gonna disappear? Like you're gonna become part
Blend
of the crowd?
in.
it's kind of
I'm
like,
thinking of like an analogy of like if you're a drop of water, right? As
yeah,
long as you're a drop of water, like you're a unique individual
yeah,
sovereign being. But as soon as that drop of water goes into the ocean, you just
you're
become
the ocean.
you just become the ocean.
Yeah, which is,
So you're now-
that is the process of spiritual development, is to become identified with the ocean, right?
I think so, but you have to go through all these different.
That's one of the,
Yeah,
one
that's,
of
that's the
the,
thing that seems so paradoxical,
right.
because the more you can be yourself, the more
Or
you
the
are,
ocean.
yeah, the more you are the ocean.
But then there's that fear that you won't, that if you are accepted, then you're not yourself. That's like the ego
Then you
way of
lose
looking
yourself.
at
You
it.
lose your
Uh-huh.
individuality.
Yeah,
This is a fear of if you being accepted, you connected with being with perfection, and then there is kind of a subtle subconscious obligation that you have to perform. Or if I'm going to be accepted, then I have to. It's because I'm perfect, and then I'm going to have to do everything perfect. So it's a very demanding situation. I don't know if I'm making it sense.
yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I relate to that.
I think it's the blending
Sometimes,
in.
yeah, that, it's like, I don't want to have other people's expectations too high, because like, oh man, it'll never happen again. But
But it's like the fear of not being seen, and
No, this is
like there are flip sides of the same.
This is making me think of something funny. I saw this quote from Wednesday Addams from the Addams Family, and she said, Tetris taught me that if you fit in, you'll disappear because the block's fitting in, and then so maybe it's somehow
I
like
think that's, I
Yeah,
think
I
that's the
also-
concept.
yeah. I also read something interesting recently. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, go ahead.
That they said that one of the common shadow aspects of light workers is this fear of acceptance, and that they call it like the lone wolf syndrome, where you think to yourself, they don't understand me, so I'm better off alone. So I'm wondering if it could be something like that.
Well, you're a nurse, so that's
Marion's raising her hand.
Mary's.
Marion.
Hi, Marion.
She's Mary.
Hi, hi. I really appreciate everything everybody's contributing, and I'm going to I always get in my plug for studying the personality types of the defenses of reason, will, and emotion, because I consider them part of the foundation of all of this work. Because when knowing what one's predominant personality type is, it makes all the difference in the world of how I handle everything in my life. And I just want to say something kind of, I think, a little bit amusing, because since I'm more the emotion type and tried to be the good girl in my life when I was younger in my family, yet I was the most rebellious one. So I had to keep all that rebellious hidden and look good. So you can hear what a lot of the images that come off of that I've worked on, for decades. So when the Pathwork Guide has said the first step of transformation is observation, not trying to be different, not trying to improve, but observation. But of course, doing all the digging around that we do. So every day I have on my to-do list complaint sessions with God, because that's part of releasing that image about being the good girl, and the emotion type is to complain. So my God self loves it when I complain and smiles at me, and because it brings me closer to God when I give all those complaints to God and give it over and surrender. So I just want to put that in there because in knowing so much about my personality type, I'm so accepting of my complaint sessions. And after I finish them, because I state an intention, I always state an intention, it's to be filled with your light, love, and life. I say that to God because when I'm in that, I'm identified with just being human, that little human limited self. But when I release all of those blockages to my energy field, then they release, I'm open, and I smile at the end of it. And I always use my hitting bat, and I scream and yell and throw everybody off the George Washington Bridge and do all that work. Now, another type, the reason type's not going to process like I do. The will type's not going to process like I do. So everybody's different. So I'm always putting in my plug for being steeped in the personality defense types.
Thank you.
Can
Thank
I
you,
just
Marion.
add something?
Yeah, Bill.
So, Marion, I think, what really strikes me is the process that you're talking about in addition to the content. So you're engaged in this process of complaining, but what I hear you're doing is you're surrendering to God.
Yes.
What is your pain, your frustration, your anger, whatever it is, that your child self, your developing self, your ununified state is giving all of that over to God. And Tracy and I were talking about surrender earlier today, and this is a foundational concept in Christianity. But even in Christianity, it's not, at least the time that I was actively going to church, it was not talked about very much. I'm not, don't ever recall, being raised in the Jewish religion that was a concept, but I'm certainly, not going to claim to be anything of an expert.
Yes.
So in any event, I'm very happy that you brought that up, Marion, because I think it is when we give over to God, when we're, realize if there's something that's separating us, that's keeping us unhappy, that we
Yes.
don't necessarily can't even resolve it, but we can just say, here, take this pain, suffering, maybe it's grief, maybe it's loss, or maybe it's illness, it's fear of death, whatever it is, and just say, this burden is too great. Let me give it to you. And then of course we do feel relief. That's the miraculous nature of surrender.
Yes.
Yes, and it comes after all the digging around, defining the images, doing the work, all that this lecture brings up, really doing all that work. Then all I can do is just keep surrendering it because I've done the work. So turning it over, giving it over, and at the end, it brings a big smile. Yep.
Thank you.